A family member came to me asking if I could turn this container into a terrarium, and I was more than happy to do so. I'll use a variety of simple techniques to turn this container into an awesome closed terrarium. The first order of business is to address the false bottom. I'll start off by removing the lid and then adding some sand for the drainage layer. I'll add enough so that there's an even layer that's about an inch deep. After pouring the sand in, I'll gently shake the container to get everything even. Then I set the container on a sheet of mesh and cut around it. I'm cutting a circle slightly larger than the container so that the edges will fold up and help keep the substrate separate from the drainage layer. With using something like sand instead of rocks, this probably wouldn't be necessary, however, it won't hurt. Once the mesh was cut to size, I added it into the terrarium. I ended up having to trim it in a few places, but after that it fit perfectly. Then once the mesh was in place, I added a layer of charcoal. This will help absorb water as well as reduce bacteria buildup. Anyway, now that the false bottom's taken care of, it's time to make the substrate. I'll be using a standard ABG mix that's made of 1 part cocoa fiber, 1 part sand, 1 part reptile bark, and 2 parts sphagnum moss. I added all the materials to a 5-gallon bucket and then thoroughly mixed everything together. I should mention that whenever I use the sphagnum moss, it's always wet. This is so that it stays moist and retains humidity. Anyway, once the substrate was all mixed up, I started to add it to the terrarium. I also sloped it towards the back to create depth. With the substrate all in place, it's time to start scaping. For this I have some Oko dragonstone. I wanted to create a big rock formation towards the back, but it ended up taking up too much space, so I decided to go with a slightly smaller structure. Once all the rocks were in place, I started to add the driftwood. As usual for my smaller projects, I'll be using spiderwood. Spiderwood is great for smaller projects as it's fairly small but has really good texture. Anyway, now that I have a scape that I'm happy with, it's time to add the moss. I added it to the terrarium, making sure to cover all of the substrate. I also ended up taking out the spiderwood and then adding it back later once I had the moss in place. Although I covered all the substrate, I did leave a few places in the back open for plants. After covering the terrarium in moss, I started to add the spiderwood back. I wasn't completely happy with the original scape, so I took this time to remake it into something better. I had to use some tongs to help me scape as I kept knocking the wood over. One of the downsides to working with a smaller project is you have less material and less room, which makes it harder to scape as things keep getting knocked over. However, with something like tongs and a little bit of patience, you can get something that looks pretty cool. Anyway, I continued to add wood to the terrarium until I got something that I was happy with. After finally getting something I was happy with, it's time to add the plants. I'm not using a large variety of plants as this container is fairly small, but I am going to be using a large variety in color. The visibility of this container is not great, so I really wanted to make sure that there was a high contrast in colors. I added larger plants such as a fern to the back and smaller plants towards the front. I also felt like the front was looking a bit bare, so I added a few pieces of cork bark. I also added a few more small plants around the terrarium. After adding all the plants, I gave everything a good spray down. I also didn't show it, but I added some springtails. They'll help clean up stuff like mold and dead plant leaves. And that's how you make a simple yet beautiful closed terrarium. I really love the way this one turned out, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm kinda jealous that I don't get to keep it. I'm really loving the variety in color. As I said earlier, I really wanted to make sure that I did have a big variety in color, because the visibility of this container is amazing. Adding all the contrasting colors made it so that viewing it from the front wasn't just a plain color of green. Like I said, this will be a closed terrarium, I just took the lid off so you can get a better look at it. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know what you think about this down in the comments. See you in the next one.